share my desktop. If only I could just share my screen. Window is out of my display. Weird. So sorry about that. Okay, it's better. Okay, inception here. So I would like to show you the recent work on the improvement or improvements for the apipie-bindings that we use for the bindings into the Foreman API. And as you probably know, the API bindings itself are more like just a wrapper between wrapping the actions in the API, but they are not that easy to use, or one have to basically know all the actions and everything. So since there are many integrations going on with the Foreman API, and recently for the step-up seeding scripts, but not just for them, there is some, or it would be nice to have something more abstract on top of the API. So I would like to go through that. It's not ready for match or anything, but part of this deep dive should be just to introduce that and to get feedback on what's going on there. And I would like to then go through the code itself. So if you want, or if you are interested and you wanted to know some internals so that you can start hacking on that, you can do that. So the first of all, there is a very small plugin to Hammer CLI. It's just for easier development, and I use that for getting up to speed with these bindings. So if you, the easiest way to use that is just clone the Hammer CLI with the branch Hammer CLI with evil, which would set almost everything up for you. So I studied that as I wanted to prepare my Foreman with Scatolo instance with some seed data. So I need to get charged before my battery dies. So there is some scenario that I use that I want to implement. So in the examples, there is this content management RB file that it's executable by this evil command. So I will first, I will just run it without that file. I got the price session there, and the entry object for this API is the Foreman method, which returns a Foreman object, and I can go and, or sound is terrible. Let me turn that off if possible. It doesn't seem so. We need to get used to this terrible sound there. I can just mute for a while. So all these data, like organizations and other associations, are loaded directly from the API-PI documentation. So there's organizations, which represents the collection of the organizations itself. It doesn't load any data yet, so it's lazy evaluated, something like with active record associations. So when I call all, it will load all the organizations that I have in my system, and there's a helper method that iterates through the organization and shows some data from that. So the maybe more useful, or what I needed to have there, was find or create method which can be used for the seeding. So if I wanted the demo org there, it creates it for me with ID 6. When I want to run it one more time, it doesn't create it, but it just finds that it's there and sends me it back. So then for the organization, it also searches for through the API bindings and finds all the resources that have organization ID required when calling the index, or the index action on the resource, so that for the organization there are the products, there's the products association there, which is again a collection of lazy loaded data, and I can use the same mechanism for creating new product within the organization unless it's already there. So I can go and say kind of create a name would be our favorite zoo. Again, it's 43, almost perfect number. And when I call it again, it's 43. So it detects, or it tracks the nesting inside the organization, and it takes the organization ID and puts it as the parameter for the product creation as well. So the same works for the repository. So in the repository, I don't remember the parameters that I want to have there, but I can go and call build, which creates a new member object that was not saved yet, and when I call show R, it shows me what parameters are there that I can use. The stars here say that these parameters are required based on the documentation. So I can say that the name will be zoo, the URL will be some URL there, and content type will be yum. So I will save the repository, and it will save it in the product itself. So when I show the repository, there is also, let's say, errata. So again, it detected that the repository has a set of errata there. So basically, this is one thing that it's already working right now. I wanted also to, when I go to the example, I want to be able to add something to associations. So when I have a content view and I want to put something in the repositories there that are already existing somewhere else, I would just load the repository, put it into the repositories association, and call save, and it should do everything for me. So one more thing that it's there right now is integration with the Foreman tasks. So when I want to synchronize the repository, I get a task object, and I can call wait on this object, and it will start polling for the updates and showing me the progress. So it's quite useful for scripting. I don't have to mess with the IDs or UIDs of the whole thing. I just work with the objects. So it should work the same when we're syncing repository or publishing content view, or with further integration into Foreman. Hopefully, provisioning a host would work the same. So the one thing that I wanted to have there as well, or for this Hammer eval plugin, was be able to run a script. So this content management RB file is also evaluable as with the eval plugin. So when I call -- file on this command, I can execute basically this script, and I can pass extra arguments to this file. So I've modified a bit the Hammer CLI to save the data into extra args, so that I can get them in the script. So I will basically create the organization, create a product and show it, create a repository, try to destroy the product. There is also a method reload that loads the data again from the API. What was next? Yeah, just testing that it works, and the synchronization, activation keys, and everything. Okay, so I can just run it, and it should get to a point that it executes everything that is there. Okay, so are there any questions or comments for the way how this tool works, or how it's being used? Any usability comments or something like that before I get to the code that handles this? Okay, so if not, I will switch to the actual implementation of that. So most of the things that are being used here should go into the apipie-bindings itself, because it's not something Foreman specific. So there is, in the apipie-bindings, in the branch that I'm working on, there is this new modal thing. So there is a base object that represents either collection of or member that the user is working with, and it should be really small, because in this class itself, because it's getting extended based on the data that come from the API documentation or from the API itself. So the real logic for this model objects is set or defined in the manager, and we forward everything that we extend or we want for the users to be able to use to the manager itself. So we don't have to worry about the things that something that we need for the logic would conflict with the attributes that the models have. So we have three types of the models. One is the collection, which represents a set of objects. Here are the methods that can be or are forwarded and can be used by the user. You can see that every collection object implements enumerable, so you can work with that as with any other enumerable object. So this is for the collection. Then we have the member, which is for the member objects. Anything interesting here? We call the save. We support the save that decides if we want to update or create. And there is a special model object called app, which is basically the, when I call the eval again, is the root object of the binding. So it's the entry point, which basically it behaves almost as a member object because it has the associations, but you can't call save on that. So that's why the application itself is called modeled as a model, but it has really limited attributes. It's basically just collection of the resources. So good thing about this, comparing to the Foreman API that we had before, or the active resource, is that you can have multiple connections in the same time. Like it's not, we don't define the Foreman class. It's always about you work with the object. So the API part of the whole thing should be generic. So we need something to keep the configuration or something to modify the behavioral that's specific for the Foreman itself, and not everything that we have right now is or even can be part of the API by documentation. So that's why in the it's right now in the Hammer CLI eval. Sorry. There is a context file, which is the context that I have when I call the eval, and so the Foreman method that I've called there is just app-config new app. So the app-config is the part of the whole thing that specifies the application-specific input there. So this is just to know what to show when we show the Foreman itself, the Foreman object itself. So this Foreman, it's defined or got from this string, nothing that important. But there are, when I'm talking about the Foreman-specific things, one thing is what's being used for searching. So when I call the organizations find or create or just find, I put there the conditions as a option hash. So that's might have there some issues. So it needs to know how to take this search or filter hash and do the query to the Foreman, and I want it to these bindings to not be tied directly to the scope search, or because in Catalog, for example, there is not scope searching on every part. So instead, and you specify the options here, and this object or this module is responsible for converting that to the search options. We also need that for the things like find or create, where you don't want to specify the scoped search query with that. You want just put then the data, and you want these two to figure out how to search if it's already there. So the app config itself is not the main thing that configures the resources, because we want to have the configuration on per resource basis. So the app config class defines the resource config classes, which basically is the configuration per resource. And for example, here we this is not important. We have the organizations config. Confines method says if this configuration is applicable for the resource that we are asking for. This is the mechanism for searching for the configuration of the resource, and the only thing that we include there is the scoped search resource config. So I could have this here directly, so that I would say for the organizations, the way how to search for the objects is like this. So I have the conditions, and I will create a scope search for that. By default, in the apipie-bindings, it will just pass that as attributes of the index action. Then maybe more interesting thing for the extent that you want when extending is the thing that I use for the Foreman tasks. So as you remember, I called the okay. So let's define the repository. I can create that one more time. Oh, I can do this. Organizations first, and call products first. This organization has no products. Okay. So what about the last organization I have there? Oh. And if I call products first there, no product even there. I'm sorry for that. So what organization we created? Demo org. So the cert should be the one that we produce. Okay. So when I call the sync, I get the task repository, and in the Foreman task config, if the resource name is Foreman tasks, I can define custom methods for this. So there's no way how to define the things like the wait method in the apipie-bindings, because it has some additional logic. So you can define the custom methods like this. So you say the key, which is the method that you want to define, and you define the lambda that gets the task as the object, and you can do additional things with that. I'm not sure what's the second attribute here. Basically, it gives you ability to extend the model objects. Because we don't have the classes for the resources itself, we can't just define module to include somewhere. So this is the way how it's done right now. So there is a lot of stuff to be done. It doesn't work very well right now with the Foreman itself. Not that it would mean that much work, but I count right now on the fact that the API has no nested attributes. It would be also it would need some additional configuration for the resources to handle the associations in general, because unfortunately we have more ways or different ways how we deal with saving or adding one object association to another. So this would need some additional work for that to be done. But hopefully, I think that the usability of this might be quite high comparing to the current state. So it might be worth spending some time on getting this into working state in general. So that's why I'm giving this deep dive in the first place. So I would now leave some place for questions. So I will just unmute, or I'm unmuted, okay. So Martin, have you tried this today? Getting it up and running, it was everything okay?
Yeah, I was just looking through the code and didn't manage to get it working because I had some other problems with my setup. But
Okay.
I hopefully get to that after this demo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I tried to try that against the Foreman API, like organizations work, but operating system and architectures. And what I would like to do today is basically make sure that this works as well, and look into possibilities like adding the templates to the operating system. So this would be something that I would like to get done today before I leave for the PTO, so that you could leverage that into the stay path seed script later weeks. So are there any other questions? Okay, if not, I will thank you for your attention. I will send the recording once it's ready on YouTube. Bye.
Thank you, bye.